My name is Darlene, and I'm 57 years old. Just 2 hours ago, I was standing in what used to be my kitchen, staring at my daughter-in-law Sandra, as she handed me a list of 40 people she'd invited for Christmas dinner. 40 people, and according to her, I would be cooking for all of them. Alone. The way she said it so matter-of-factly, like I was the hired help, rather than the woman who raised the man she married. I felt my hands trembling as I held that crumpled piece of paper, trying to process what she was asking of me. This wasn't the first time Sandra had made unreasonable demands, but this felt different. This felt like the final straw. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you won't believe how this Christmas dinner disaster turned out, and what I did next will shock you. Let me take you back to the beginning so you understand how I got to this breaking point. I married my husband Frank 35 years ago, and together we built a beautiful life in the little colonial house on Maple Street. Frank was the love of my life, a gentle man who worked construction during the day and spent evenings helping me tend to our vegetable garden. We raised our son Marcus in that house, filling it with laughter Sunday dinners and the kind of warmth that only comes from genuine love and respect. Marcus was our everything. I remember teaching him to ride his bike in our driveway, helping him with homework at the kitchen table, and watching him graduate from college with tears of pride streaming down my face. He grew up to be a good man, or at least I thought he had. He became a software engineer, bought his own apartment, and seemed to have his life together. Then 5 years ago, he met Sandra at a networking event downtown. She was stunning, I'll give her that. Tall blonde with the kind of confidence that fills a room. She worked in marketing for a tech startup and always dressed like she'd stepped out of a magazine. When Marcus first brought her home for dinner, I tried so hard to make her feel welcome. I cooked her favorite meal, bought flowers for the guest room, and genuinely wanted to embrace her as part of our family. But from that very first visit, something felt off. Sandra barely touched the pot roast I'd spent all day preparing, claiming she was on a special diet. She walked through our home like she was appraising it, commenting on how the furniture was vintage and how the kitchen could use updating. She never asked about my life, my interests, or my relationship with Marcus. Every conversation seemed to revolve around her career, her goals, her vision for the future. 3 years ago, my world shattered when Frank had a massive heart attack while working in the garage. He was gone before the ambulance even arrived. I don't think I've ever felt pain like that, losing the man who'd been my partner for over 3 decades. The house felt enormous and empty without his presence. That's when Marcus and Sandra made their generous offer to move in with me. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone right now," Marcus had said, holding my hands across the kitchen table where Frank and I had shared thousands of meals. "Sandra and I can move into the guest room, help with the house, make sure you're okay." At the time, it felt like a blessing. I was drowning in grief, and the thought of having my son close by seemed like exactly what I needed. What I didn't realize was that Sandra saw this arrangement very differently than I did. To her, this wasn't about supporting a grieving mother-in-law. This was about free housing while they saved money for their dream home in the suburbs. Within weeks of moving in, Sandra began reorganizing everything. She rearranged the living room furniture without asking, replaced my kitchen curtains with stark white blinds, and even threw away some of Frank's belongings that she deemed clutter. When I protested, she'd smile that practiced smile and say things like, "Darlene, I'm just trying to help you modernize a little. Frank would want you to move forward, right?" The daily dynamics became increasingly uncomfortable. Sandra would leave her dirty dishes for me to clean, ask me to do her laundry along with Marcus's, and treat me more like a housekeeper than the homeowner. She'd invite her friends over without asking, leaving me to either hide in my bedroom or play hostess to people who barely acknowledged my existence. When I tried to talk to Marcus about it, he'd always defend her. "Mom Sandra's under a lot of pressure at work," he'd say. "She's not used to living with family. Just give her some time to adjust." But time only made things worse. Sandra became more comfortable asserting her authority in what was supposed to be my home. She'd rearrange my schedule, telling me when I could have friends over, or when it would be convenient for me to run errands. She'd critique my cooking, my cleaning, even my choice of television shows. I felt like a stranger in the house Frank and I had built together, watching helplessly as this woman systematically erased our presence. As we approached the Christmas season this year, I thought things might improve. The holidays had always been my favorite time, when I could transform our home into a warm, welcoming space filled with the scents of cinnamon and pine. I'd been looking forward to creating some new traditions that might help bring us all closer together. 2 weeks before Christmas, Sandra announced during dinner that she wanted to host a holiday gathering. "Just family," she said initially. "Maybe 15 people total. Marcus's cousins, my sister, a few close friends." I was actually excited about the prospect. 15 people felt manageable, and I offered to help with the cooking and planning. Sandra seemed pleased with my enthusiasm and began making lists of potential guests and menu items. But as the days passed, the guest list kept growing. "Oh, I forgot about my college roommate who's in town," Sandra would say, adding 2 more names. "And my boss mentioned she didn't have plans, so I invited her and her husband." By the end of the first week, we were up to 25 people. I started to feel a flutter of anxiety, but I told myself I could handle it. I'd hosted large gatherings before, though never without Frank's help. The second week brought even more additions. Sandra's co-workers from her previous job, a few influencers she'd met through her marketing work who she wanted to impress, some neighbors from her old apartment building. By the time she handed me that final list, we were at 40 people and my head was spinning. "40 people, Sandra," I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's quite a lot for a home dinner party." "Oh, it'll be fine," she said dismissively, not even looking up from her phone. "You love cooking, and you have so much experience with entertaining. Besides, Marcus and I will be way too busy with work to help much. His big project is due right after New Year's, and I've got that campaign launch." I suggested we consider catering, or at least simplifying the menu to something more manageable. Sandra's response was swift and final. "Catering is so impersonal, and honestly, it's expensive. We're trying to save money for the house down payment, you understand." What I understood was that I was being voluntarily conscripted into providing free labor for Sandra's social climbing expedition. The menu she'd planned was elaborate beyond reason. 2 types of turkey honey, glazed ham, 5 different salads, 3 varieties of soup, homemade dinner rolls, green bean casserole, mashed potatoes, sweet potato casserole stuffing cranberry sauce from scratch, and 8 different desserts, including a chocolate Yule log she'd seen on Pinterest. When I tried to negotiate suggesting we cut back on some dishes or ask guests to bring sides potluck style, Sandra looked at me like I'd suggested serving fast food on paper plates. "Darlene, this is important to me. I want to show everyone what kind of hostess I am, what kind of family Marcus married into." Meanwhile, Sandra spent her days getting manicures shopping for a new dress for the party and meeting friends for lunch while I made increasingly frantic trips to the grocery store and spent hours researching recipes and timing schedules. She'd casually mention to people on the phone, "Oh yes, my mother-in-law just loves cooking for crowds. She's handling everything." I realized this wasn't about Christmas or family at all. This was about Sandra using my skills and my home as a backdrop for her personal brand. I was a prop in her performance of domestic perfection, and the worst part was that Marcus seemed completely oblivious to how overwhelmed and undervalued I felt. The breaking point came on the morning of December 23rd. I'd been up until 2 in the morning the night before finalizing shopping lists and prep schedules, trying to figure out how one person could possibly prepare a feast for 40 people in less than 48 hours. I was already exhausted before the day even began. Sandra swept into the kitchen around 10, coffee in hand, looking perfectly put together as always. She surveyed my notes and lists scattered across the counter and casually dropped another bombshell. "Oh, I almost forgot," she said, as if she were mentioning the weather. "We'll need the house completely decorated, too. Full Christmas setup table settings for 40 people, and I want everything to look magazine perfect. I might post some photos to my Instagram." My hand stopped moving as I processed what she'd just said. "Sandra, when exactly do you think I'll have time to decorate the entire house while I'm preparing food for 40 people?" "Well, you're retired," she said with that infuriating smile. "You have all day. I mean, what else are you doing?" What else was I doing? I was planning to single-handedly execute a dinner party that would challenge an experienced catering team. I was trying to figure out how to cook multiple turkeys in one oven. I was calculating how many pounds of potatoes I'd need and whether my largest pots were big enough for the quantities required. Sandra, I need help with this, I said, my voice starting to crack. This is too much for one person. Marcus could maybe help a little, she said thoughtfully, but honestly, he's so stressed about his work deadline. I'd rather not burden him with domestic stuff right now. You understand? That's when I did something I hadn't done in months. I went looking for my son, determined to have an honest conversation about what his wife was expecting of me. I found Marcus in the living room laptop, open, completely absorbed in his work. Marcus, honey, I began gently, I need to talk to you about Christmas dinner. He didn't even look up from his screen. What about it? Mom Sandra said you're handling everything. That's great. She's invited 40 people and she expects me to cook and serve everything by myself. I also need to decorate the entire house. This is overwhelming. Finally, Marcus glanced up, but his expression wasn't sympathetic. It was mildly annoyed, like I was interrupting something important to complain about trivial matters. Mom Sandra's been really stressed with her job lately. This party is important to her. Can't you just figure it out? You used to cook for big groups when Dad was alive. Yes, I used to cook for big groups when Frank was alive. Frank who would spend days helping me prep. Frank who would set up tables and chairs and handle all the logistics I couldn't manage alone. Frank who would stand beside me in the kitchen making jokes and keeping my spirits up when the work felt overwhelming. Frank who treated our home like a partnership rather than a convenience. I tried once more. Marcus, I'm asking for help, not for someone to take over. Just some assistance with the prep work, or maybe we could cater part of it. Mom, you're being dramatic. It's just dinner. Just dinner. 40 people was just dinner. A week's worth of preparation was just dinner. The complete transformation of my home into Sandra's perfect backdrop was just dinner. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen at 2 a.m, surrounded by my overwhelming lists and impossible timelines. I looked around at the kitchen where Frank and I had cooked together every day for 30 years, the same kitchen where I'd taught Marcus to crack eggs and flip pancakes, the kitchen that now felt like a commercial workspace where I was expected to perform miracles without support or appreciation. I thought about all the Christmas mornings when Marcus was little, how excited he'd get about the special breakfast I'd make, how he'd help me set the table and arrange the presents. I remembered the year he gave me a ceramic Christmas tree he'd made in art class, painted with wobbly green stripes and gold star. I still had that tree packed away in the decorations box Sandra had deemed too outdated for this year's display. December 24th arrived gray and cold, matching my mood perfectly. Sandra emerged from the guest room looking radiant, dressed for another day of last-minute shopping and beauty appointments. She surveyed my prep work with a critical eye. "The turkey doesn't look big enough," she announced, poking at the 20-pound bird I'd picked up yesterday. "Are you sure that'll feed everyone?" "I bought 2 turkeys, Sandra, plus the ham." "Where are the fancy cloth napkins I mentioned? The paper ones look so cheap." "You mentioned cloth napkins yesterday. I haven't had time to shop for them yet." "Well, you'll need to get them today. And don't forget the good china. We can't serve company on everyday dishes." That afternoon, while I frantically tried to begin prep work, Sandra took a phone call in the living room. I could hear every word of her conversation, which seemed to be with one of her marketing colleagues. "Oh yes, Christmas dinner is going to be absolutely gorgeous." Sandra's voice carried clearly into the kitchen. "My mother-in-law is an amazing cook. She just loves entertaining and doing these big, elaborate meals. Honestly, she lives for this stuff. I barely have to do anything. She handles it all herself." In that moment, listening to Sandra describe my exhaustion and stress as enthusiasm, something inside me snapped. I wasn't a beloved family member preparing a loving meal. I was unpaid labor being exploited for someone else's social media moment. The woman talking so casually about my love for this work hadn't spent a single minute helping me plan shop or prepare. She hadn't even bothered to ask if I was okay or if I needed anything. I walked quietly to my bedroom and opened my laptop. My fingers shook as I searched for flights leaving that evening. Tampa, Florida appeared on my screen, and I remembered my sister Emma's standing invitation to visit any time. Emma, who lived in a sunny little condo near the beach and had been telling me for months that I needed to stand up for myself. The flight left at 6 p.m. It was already 3:30, and Sandra and Marcus had just left for some last-minute shopping, instructing me to get started on everything while they were gone. I had exactly what I needed to make the most important decision of the last 3 years. I booked the flight with trembling hands, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. The confirmation email felt surreal, like I was reading about someone else's life. Darlene Peterson departing at 6:15 p.m. for Tampa, Florida. One-way ticket. I'd never done anything this spontaneous or drastic in my entire life. The next 2 hours moved like a dream. I pulled my old suitcase from the bedroom closet and began packing with methodical precision. Basic clothes, toiletries, my medications, and a few precious photos, including my favorite picture of Frank and me from our anniversary trip to Niagara Falls. I left behind the expensive jewelry Marcus had given me for birthdays and holidays, taking only my wedding ring and the small pearl earrings Frank had surprised me with on our first Christmas as a married couple. I withdrew $500 from my checking account at the ATM down the street, money I'd been saving for my Social Security checks for emergencies. This felt like the biggest emergency I'd ever faced, even if it was one of my own making. The hardest part was writing the letter. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd shared thousands of meals with Frank and Marcus, surrounded by the prep ingredients for a feast I would never cook. I wrote slowly, choosing each word carefully. Marcus and Sandra, by the time you read this, I'll be on a plane to Florida to spend Christmas with Emma. I can't cook dinner for 40 people by myself. More importantly, I won't cook dinner for 40 people by myself. I've spent the last year feeling like hired help in my own home, and I'm done pretending that's acceptable. I love you, Marcus, but I won't be treated like a servant anymore. The groceries are here. The recipes are on the counter. Figure it out. Mom. I sealed the letter in an envelope and left it propped against the salt shaker in the middle of the kitchen table, right where Sandra had left her guest list that morning. My phone showed 4:15. Sandra and Marcus would be back by 5:30, expecting to find me elbow-deep in turkey preparation. Instead, they'd find an empty house and a letter that would change everything. The taxi ride to the airport felt like traveling through a different dimension. The driver, a chatty man in his 60s named Harold, made conversation about Christmas travel and family gatherings. I found myself telling him I was visiting my sister for the holidays, which felt both true and completely inadequate to describe what was actually happening. "That's nice," Harold said as we pulled into the departure area. "Nothing like family for the holidays." I agreed with him, though I was beginning to understand that family meant something very different than I'd been pretending for the past year. The airport buzzed with holiday travelers, most of them heading home to be with loved ones. I watched families reuniting at the baggage claim, children running into the arms of grandparents, couples sharing excited kisses after time apart. Everyone seemed to be moving toward connection while I was running away from the people who were supposed to matter most to me. But as I settled into my window seat and watched the ground crew prepare the plane for departure, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. For the first time in over a year, no one needed anything from me. No one was making demands or taking my presence for granted. I was just Darlene, a woman on a plane making a choice about her own life. I called Emma from 30,000 feet, my voice shaky with adrenaline and relief. "Emma, it's me. I'm on a plane to Tampa. Can you pick me up in 2 hours?" My sister, bless her heart, didn't ask for explanations or express shock. She just said, "Of course, honey. I'll be there. Are you okay?" "I think I will be," I answered, and for the first time in a very long time I meant it. My phone started ringing before we'd even reached cruising altitude, but I'd turned it to airplane mode and had no intention of changing that anytime soon. By the time I landed in Tampa and turned it back on, I had 17 missed calls from Marcus and 12 from Sandra. The voicemail messages started angry and escalated to desperate. Marcus's first message: "Mom, what the hell is this letter supposed to mean? You can't just leave. We have 40 people coming tomorrow." Sandra's voice shrill with panic: "Darlene, this is ridiculous. You need to come home right now. I have people flying in from out of state for this dinner." The messages continued throughout the night as I sat on Emma's couch with a cup of tea, finally telling someone the whole truth about my living situation. Emma listened without interrupting, her face growing more concerned with each detail I shared. "Honey," she finally said, "what took you so long?" Marcus's later messages revealed the chaos I'd left behind. Apparently, after finding my letter, he and Sandra had spent the evening calling everyone on the guest list, trying to figure out what to do. Some people offered to bring dishes. Others suggested moving the party to a restaurant. A few simply said they'd make other plans. "Mom, this is a disaster," Marcus said in one message, his voice cracking with stress. "Sandra's crying. I don't know how to cook a turkey. Please just come home and we'll figure this out afterward." But Sandra's messages told a different story. Even in crisis, she couldn't resist trying to control the narrative. "Darlene, you're being incredibly selfish. This is my first Christmas hosting Marcus's family and you're ruining it. I don't know what's gotten into you, but this behavior is completely unacceptable." Christmas morning brought a different tone. Marcus called again, this time with exhaustion replacing anger. "Mom, I owe you an apology. Last night was a nightmare. We ended up ordering pizza for the people who still came, which was only about 15. Most of Sandra's work friends canceled when they heard there wouldn't be a real dinner. Sandra and I had a huge fight about the whole thing. She kept saying I needed to control my mother, and I finally realized how insane that sounded. You're not something to be controlled. You're my mom, and I let my wife treat you like household staff. I'm sorry." That phone call changed everything. For the first time in months, my son sounded like the man I'd raised, rather than Sandra's spokesperson. He admitted he'd been so focused on keeping peace in his relationship that he'd ignored how miserable I'd become. He confessed that he'd noticed Sandra's demanding behavior, but had convinced himself it would improve with time. "Some of Sandra's friends actually called her out," Marcus continued. "Lisa, the one who works in HR, told her she was being unreasonable, expecting one person to cook for 40 people. Even Sandra's sister asked why she wasn't helping with her own party. I think Sandra realized how bad this looked when other people started questioning it." Emma and I spent Christmas Day on the beach, walking barefoot in the sand, and talking about everything I'd been holding inside. She helped me understand that loving someone doesn't mean accepting poor treatment, and that setting boundaries isn't the same thing as being uncooperative or difficult. "You raised a good man," Emma said, as we watched the sunset paint the sky orange and pink. "He just forgot himself for a while. But Sandra hasn't forgotten anything. She knows exactly what she's been doing." I stayed in Florida for a full week, giving myself time to think clearly away from the emotional intensity of the situation. Emma and I explored little coastal towns, ate at restaurants where I ordered whatever I wanted without worrying about anyone else's preferences, and I remembered what it felt like to make decisions about my own time and energy. When Marcus drove down to Florida to pick me up, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked like he'd lost 10 pounds and aged 5 years. But more than that, he looked ashamed, and I could see my little boy in his face again, the one who used to apologize so earnestly when he'd done something wrong. The 4-hour drive home gave us time to have the most honest conversation we'd had in years. Marcus told me about the disaster of Christmas night, how Sandra had spent most of the evening complaining about being embarrassed rather than acknowledging her role in creating the situation. He described trying to cook a turkey without any idea what he was doing, burning the rolls and serving store-bought potato salad to the confused guests who still showed up. "I kept thinking about all those Christmas mornings when Dad would help you in the kitchen," Marcus said, his hands gripping the steering wheel tightly. "How it was this team effort and everyone was happy to chip in. Sandra kept talking about how this was supposed to be her moment to shine, and I realized she'd never once asked what you wanted or how you felt about any of it." We talked about boundaries and respect, about the difference between being helpful and being taken advantage of. Marcus admitted he'd been afraid to stand up to Sandra because he didn't want conflict in his relationship, but he was starting to understand that avoiding conflict with his wife had created a much bigger conflict with his mother. "I want things to change," he said as we crossed the Georgia state line. "But Sandra's not taking this well. She keeps saying you overreacted and that families are supposed to help each other. She doesn't seem to understand that help goes both ways." When we arrived home, Sandra was waiting in the living room, her arms crossed and her expression carefully controlled. She'd clearly prepared a speech. "Darlene, I think we need to clear the air about what happened. I understand you felt overwhelmed, but walking out without any discussion wasn't fair to anyone. We could have worked something out if you'd just communicated better." I looked at this woman who'd been living in my house for over a year, who'd reorganized my life to suit her convenience, who'd spent weeks planning a party for 40 people while expecting me to handle all the work, and I realized she still didn't get it. "Sandra," I said calmly. "I did communicate. I asked for help multiple times. I suggested alternatives. I expressed concerns about the workload. You dismissed everything I said because it didn't fit your vision." "But family helps each other," she protested. "That's what family does." "You're right," I agreed. "Family does help each other. But for the past year, the help has only gone in one direction. You've lived here rent-free, I've done your laundry, cleaned up after your friends, and rearranged my life around your schedule. When do I get help?" The conversation continued for another hour, with Sandra alternating between justifying her behavior and suggesting I'd been unreasonable. But Marcus, for the first time since they'd moved in, didn't automatically take her side. He listened to both of us and started setting the boundaries that should have existed from the beginning. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my own little apartment just 20 minutes away from Marcus and Sandra's house. Yes, they finally moved out and bought their dream home, though I suspect my departure accelerated that timeline considerably. My new place is small, but it's mine. I've decorated it exactly how I want, with Frank's favorite chair by the window and my grandmother's china displayed in a cabinet where I can see it every day. Marcus and I have dinner together every Tuesday night, alternating between my place and a little Italian restaurant downtown that makes the best chicken parmesan I've ever tasted. We talk about everything now: his work, my new pottery class books we've been reading, memories of his father. Our relationship feels honest again, built on mutual respect rather than obligation and guilt. Sandra and I maintain a polite but distant relationship. She's civil when we see each other, but there's an underlying tension that I don't think we'll ever fully resolve. That's okay with me. I've learned that not every relationship needs to be close to be functional. She's my son's wife, and I respect that role, but I don't have to sacrifice my own well-being to make her comfortable. Last Christmas was completely different. Instead of a massive production, we went to dinner at a beautiful restaurant overlooking the lake. Marcus made reservations for just the three of us, and Sandra seemed to genuinely enjoy the elegant atmosphere and professional service. No one had to cook clean or stress about hosting. We actually talked to each other instead of rushing around trying to manage an event. I've joined a yoga class at the community center, reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with, and started volunteering at the local animal shelter. I'm reading books I want to read, watching movies I enjoy, and eating dinner at 6:30 because that's when I'm hungry, not because it fits someone else's schedule. The hardest part of this whole experience wasn't leaving that Christmas Eve. It was learning to value myself enough to believe I deserved better treatment. For too long, I'd confused being accommodating with being loving. I thought that putting everyone else's needs first made me a good mother and a generous person. But real love requires honest communication and mutual respect, and enabling poor behavior isn't the same thing as being supportive. I think about Frank often, especially when I'm making decisions about how to spend my time and energy. He always treated me like his partner, not his convenience. He valued my opinions, appreciated my contributions, and never expected me to sacrifice my own needs for his comfort. That's the standard I should have maintained after he died, instead of being so grateful for any company that I accepted treatment I never would have tolerated from him. Marcus has grown up a lot over these past months. He's learned to have difficult conversations with his wife instead of avoiding conflict at my expense. He's also learned to cook a decent turkey, which he proved last Thanksgiving when he insisted on preparing the meal himself. Sandra helped without complaining, and the three of us had a lovely low-key celebration that felt much more like family than any of our previous gatherings. People often ask if I regret my dramatic Christmas Eve departure, if I wish I'd handled things differently. The truth is, I regret waiting so long to stand up for myself. I regret allowing a situation to deteriorate to the point where such drastic action felt necessary. But I don't regret leaving. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's poor choices, even when that someone is family. The biggest lesson I've learned is that you teach people how to treat you by what you're willing to accept. For over a year, I taught Sandra that she could make demands without contributing, that she could reorganize my life without consulting me, and that she could treat my home like her personal service industry. I taught Marcus that keeping peace was more important than protecting his mother's dignity. Most importantly, I taught myself that my comfort and happiness mattered less than everyone else's. That Christmas Eve flight was the beginning of teaching everyone, including myself, something completely different. I learned that I could be brave when necessary, that I could choose myself without being selfish, and that sometimes the most mature response to an impossible situation is to simply walk away. Today, when people ask about that Christmas when I left my daughter-in-law to figure out dinner for 40 people, I tell them it was the best gift I ever gave myself. It was the gift of remembering who I am beyond what I can do for other people. It was the gift of rediscovering my own voice after months of staying silent to keep peace. Sometimes the best gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from a situation that doesn't serve you. And sometimes that's exactly what it takes for other people to realize your true worth. My relationship with my son is stronger now because it's based on respect rather than guilt. My life is richer because I'm living it according to my own values instead of someone else's expectations. If you're watching this and recognizing yourself in my story, know that it's never too late to change course. You don't have to accept poor treatment because someone calls it love. You don't have to sacrifice your well-being to avoid difficult conversations. And you definitely don't have to cook Christmas dinner for 40 people if you don't want to, regardless of who's asking. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who were taking advantage of your kindness? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories about finding your voice and standing up for yourself. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope your holidays are filled with the kind of love that lifts you up rather than weighs you down. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is the courage to demand the respect we deserve.